So let's go live now to our expert, Bruce Wolpe. Bruce, thank you so much for your time. The first story that really is quite fascinating is following some of these tweets from Donald Trump. In particular, there's one that is quite interesting about the dropping of one of the key candidates for the Democrats.
Yes, good morning, Annalise. It's been a busy political day in the United States. Kirsten Gillibrand, the senator from New York who succeeded Hillary Clinton, has dropped out of the Democratic race. And then President Trump tweeted, "Oh, I'm kind of glad the Democrats didn't find out that she was the one I was most afraid of." So he was having fun with Kirsten Gillibrand. He has a bad history with New York politicians. He hated Hillary Clinton. He hates the mayor of New York, Bill de Blasio. And Jerry Nadler, the chairman of the Judiciary Committee that is conducting an impeachment inquiry into the president, he's from New York, too. So it's been a big day for New York politics, and Trump emerges on top of the Democratic field from New York.
I'm sure there wouldn't be too much hard feelings from the Democrats about that particular tweet. No. What's really interesting is he's wading into the Brexit debate. We have another tweet here that he's written. He said, "Would be very hard for Jeremy Corbyn, the leader of Britain's Labour Party, to seek a no-confidence vote against new Prime Minister Boris Johnson, especially in light of the fact that Boris is exactly what the UK has been looking for and will prove to be a great one. Love UK." Now, this is pretty extraordinary intervention in another country's political sphere, especially something as tumultuous as Brexit. What do you think the president's thinking is behind this?
Not that extraordinary for President Trump. Boris Johnson has been a favorite of his for some time. He touted him as the favorite to be the next prime minister after Theresa May. You'll recall during the contest to succeed her that was waged in the Conservative Party. And he's aligned with him. Boris Johnson is going after the EU through Brexit. President Trump, as we could see at the G7, expressed his strong dislike for the EU, and he wants to weaken it as an institution. So they are aligned. They get along really well. They have a similar sartorial style, and Trump really enjoys his company. And I think he really admires what the Prime Minister did with Parliament overnight in having it prorogued. And I think President Trump would love to have that power in the United States to keep the House of Representatives from meeting. He can't do it in the United States. It's a completely different system of government. So I think he just sees a prime minister in the Trumpian mold who is executing the Trumpian agenda for the United Kingdom, one of America's strongest allies. So I think he's having fun, but there's some real seriousness behind the fun that he's having with Prime Minister Johnson.
He also does get to make presidential executive orders, which I'm sure Boris Johnson would love that power.
That's true, if he could.
Swing it. But it's interesting to see on that point, his second tweet on that. He says, "I think that what the US president is saying is that Boris Johnson is exactly what he's been looking for, a compliant prime minister who will hand Britain's public services and protections over to US corporations in a free trade deal." So lobbing it right back at President Trump from Jeremy Corbyn there. Do you think that this is the new world of diplomacy? This is how it all happens, tweets being lobbed backwards and forwards. Is this going to translate into any kind of real world?
You know, if you think about how...
Any real world results?
I think so. If you think about how President Obama conducted his presidency with Twitter, it was a much more low-key, more cultural commentary, historical. When important people would pass away, he would note them and everything. But now it is a, hour-by-hour communication tool for the world, and President Macron does the same, and Boris Johnson does. So it really is, yes, how business is being conducted. On what Jeremy Corbyn had to say, there is a tie back to the U.S. The left is suspicious of global trade agreements. The Democrats also had reservations about the U.S., Canada, Mexico free trade agreement, had reservations about the Trans-Pacific Partnership. So there is this alignment of left-of-center Democratic parties in the Western world, how they feel about global trade deals that are seen to benefit big business over small business and labor, that may not be as responsive on environmental issues as some other. So there is this common culture now, which is amplified by Twitter, in which there's networks of alignment on important social, political, and cultural issues.
One country he can't really tweet too well at because he won't get much in response is China. What do you make of the latest progress with talks underway to try and get this trade impasse headed off?
Yeah, since the developments over the weekend, which were promising, there have been some headwinds in both countries, and the question of how serious the new talks will be. I think there's a lot of posturing going on between the two countries, and I think they're trying to stake out positions. And again, it's more difficult territory for China because there's more substantively that for them to retreat on, and that's not an easy road to go down. But if there's going to be a way out of here, there's going to have to be some movement along those lines. Nevertheless, I think there are two things to watch, as we've been discussing. Will the next round of substantive discussions at the deputies level occur as early as next week? And then secondly, really looking ahead to the end of the year, there really has to be significant progress if we're going to have a deal, because by the end of the year, if there is no deal, I think China will turn completely cynical about the prospects and whether it's worthwhile. And the United States gets consumed with the presidential election. It becomes very political on the U.S. side. So really, next week, the next 2 weeks, very significant. The two leaders will be at the United Nations in September. That's where a possible meeting may also occur between Trump and the Iranian president. And then you have to look for a timeline towards the end of the year if we're really going to have substantive progress here. And so it's all in the balance and up in the air at the same time.
And just finally, what do you make of the demand from Iran that sanctions be lifted before any kind of discussions happen with the United States? Is that likely to happen?
I think it's in the same mold as what's going on with China. A lot of positioning and posturing. Again, just going back to last week, it was unthinkable that the foreign minister of Iran would fly to the G7, meet with the president of France, meet with meet with the foreign minister, and hold discussions on how to open a really strong diplomatic channel to dial down tensions with Iran and in the Persian Gulf. So I think the same thing is happening here, where Rouhani says, the president, I'm not meeting with Trump until the sanctions are lifted. And Trump has laid down his markers. So again, the proof is going to be in the pudding. Again, the UN week in New York coming up in September is very important, because that would be the venue for the two presidents to meet. So we'll see. For the moment, I tend to be a little more optimistic than pessimistic, but only developments will tell. And again, are there going to be hostilities in the Gulf? Does something happen with drones or missiles? That would be a really bad sign. So if it stays quiet, that's a promising foundation for talks to possibly get underway.
Well, we know stranger things have happened. Bruce Wolpe, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Annalise.